Welcome one more day to Space and Harmony. And welcome also to Spring 2020, which is under a global paralysis because of COVID-19 pandemic, as you know. So thank you and congratulations for having come this far to listen to these alternative views. It is not easy to find this information now. And if you are paying attention, it means that you are not a mere zombie. I hope you are using this time for pondering and reflection because it's very important. Here in Spain, we are only allowed to go shopping for food and a few other needs, and in other countries as well. I think it's also possible to take the dog out, but not more than one people at a time. There are fines for that. And don't get me wrong, but I think all this is very positive because it's giving nature and even humanity a rest. We have less noises, less pollution. Some people are forced to ponder, stay more calm, and be more aware of others. But obviously, we are seeing many contradictory attitudes. The chaff is being separated from the wheat, and we were told this would happen. But obviously, some politicians and power holders are trying to take advantage of the situation, and they will pay for that eventually, don't worry. Nobody is going to escape to the judgment. And obviously, we are also seeing selfishness in how people invade the supermarkets to empty the shelves, as if this were the zombie holocaust, which to some extent can be considered as that. But this, in part, is a global hysteria induced by the mass media, which is full of misinformation. The main advices in general are not the best ones to infuse calm into people and keep the immune system high, strong. The main commands are usually stay at home, eating, having fun, watching movies, chatting or whatever. And of course, go to the pharmacy in case you need it, you feel fever. In Spain, actually, doctors are recommended to stay at home if the symptoms of COVID-19 are not too strong, because hospitals are completely collapsed. We have more cases than those that are registered. Officially, we have 20,000 cases, but some experts say we have twice as much, probably as much as Italy. And in hospitals, some people have preference, and those who are the weakest, mostly old people with the least expectancy of surviving, are somehow allowed to leave this world because doctors cannot do very much about them. And all those who are contaminated and are close to dying cannot be visited by families. So many people cannot even say goodbye to their relatives that are dying. As you can see, the situation is unprecedented in our recent times. Obviously, there have been more pandemics. But now, many people are waking up a little bit more. Many complain, of course, and cry for what they see as a horrible situation. Most people don't seem to care about the things that true beings of light have been announcing for at least 2000 years, and even from before that. Especially this year, when many things that were said have come to pass. Remember how in January 2020, Brother Pedro in his channel and myself said that this was the year to bring order in the middle of chaos. And I also said that 20 and 20 makes 40, which is obviously related to a quarantine and going through the dark journey of the soul, if you will. 20 is also associated to the archetype of the trumpets of awakening. So we have a judgment of conscience. Don't say I didn't tell about that. So nobody in humanity can't say that there was no warning. So it's now time to understand much deeper what's really going on, not the things that we are told in the media, which are mostly inaccurate. In the previous video, I gave some tips. Remember that protection is not just a matter of taking hygienic measures, which are important, but it mostly has to do with raising the vibrations, energy protection, and it depends on many factors: food, way of living, and so on. It is essential to eat little and not too much mucus forming foods, but obviously there are other factors which we must see later. We also have to see that when we read the word COVID forwards and backwards, we see a key that tell us about what is happening, and not only with the word COVID, but with other labels of viruses. And this is information that came to my conscience during these days of reflection. Now, before going into all that, I'll first give a brief overview so you can understand the global context of all this. I do not know if some of you have realized that this pandemic is not the first. Remember that in 1348 there was a decade of massive deaths caused by the so-called bubonic plague, the Black Death, which was supposedly transmitted by black rats and other animals. I don't think this was the real source, even though these animals might transmit that disease. In any case, this decimated Europe and also affected other parts of the globe. Now, there were chroniclers in China and Europe who told how people witnessed the presence of men dressed in black, knocking on the doors of the houses without apparent justification, and sometimes walking on the fields with instruments that looked like scythes, and they seemed to be also spreading something in the fields, in the crops, and all just before the outbreaks of Black Death. Coincidence? This was actually the origin of the famous image of the death with the scythes, and also the origin of the famous legends concerning the popular Men in Black. Actually, there seems to be a strange connection between pandemics, the UFO phenomenon, and strange appearances, and reasonably, all that makes many think this is something caused by aliens. But let's not forget that there might be also some entities that simply monitor humanity and take advantage of catastrophic situations which they somehow can predict because they are existing on a 4D level. And some calamities repeat cyclically. But wait until the end to draw your own conclusions. Let's now pay attention to the fact that the Black Death took place right after the Christian Crusades, which were imposed by the pseudo-apostolic Catholic Church. I'll leave more information concerning that. And for now, realize also that it's also very significant that for the last 300 years, very strong pandemics have been repeating cyclically and increasingly, and always after massive wars. Actually, for many hundreds of years, Europe was full of religions of war, and in 1720 there was a new outbreak of the Black Death in Marseille, and 100 years later, in 1820, there was an epidemic of cholera in Asia, which affected the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and right after the First World War, 2 years before 1920, there was a virulent worldwide outbreak of the so-called Spanish flu. And today, many would surely believe that the Spaniards were the source, when in reality, the flu itself was not Spanish because it has no nationality, and it was called Spanish flu because Spanish journalists were the ones that were speaking more or less openly about the spread of the disease which was taboo in other countries, even the United States. And back then, a possible source was identified precisely in United States. So to some extent, this is an example of how the sectarian mindset accuses and discriminates others. In any case, in that year 1918, the flu killed 40 million people, and after a few years, it caused 100 million deaths overall, all over the world, of course. An amazing number of people. But I don't think there was just a physical source for this virus. There are other factors implied. It is true that the virus of the so-called Spanish flu was found, and it was a mutation of the common flu. And in principle, it killed so many people because at that time nobody had developed antibodies and there were no vaccines. Now, in the old days, there were very interesting views concerning this sort of sickness, and there were several terms. Flu is not just the only one. We have in Spain the term gripe, which comes from the term grippe in French, which means to curl up, to hold on shivering with high fever. And there is also another word known as influenza, an Italian word. And this word has been used since the 15th century to designate a series of flu-like symptoms that were attributed to the influence of heavenly bodies, including the moon. And that is not very far from the truth, because there seems to be an electromagnetic and astral factor that promotes the generation of certain viruses. Actually, viruses remain an enigma for science, which has not definitely concluded what is a virus and how it originates. They are known to have some energetic structure, and some even look like nanobots, as if they were residues of some sort of technological advance humanity in the past or something like that. They might be even designed, but when viruses were discovered, humanity didn't have technology for developing nanobots. There are reasons to think that these viruses are generated by negative vibratory patterns. They might be a byproduct of the Elohim, vibratory intelligences of the fallen world, this fallen Earth, which is not the true Earth. In the true realm of life, there are no viruses, nor pathogens, nor death of any kind. It is also known that viruses and pathogens can be affected by means of energy. Actually, the inventor Royal Rife made a machine to project frequencies into pathogens and viruses, and he was able to verify that this can be disintegrated literally, and he cured diseases that way, supposedly. But shortly after discovering this, certain power holders destroyed completely his laboratory, and they told him to keep his mouth closed. So there was something there. Today, science responds to pharmaceutical demands and obviously focuses on investigating viruses on a blood plasma level when there are many more layers of influence. There are more factors involved. This is not just a biological phenomenon. There is actually another enigma, a pandemic that was spread right after the Second World War. Notice that pattern. It is the so-called AIDS, which in the 1950s was not known as that because nobody knew what the hell was taking place. But in 1983, Luc Montagnier, a French doctor, discovered this was a disease that has to do with the immunity of the person. It's when people lose the immunity completely, and they can even be killed by a common flu. This is why it was called acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. Unfortunately, many began to speak about this condition as HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus. And the truth is that so far there has been no one to prove the existence of a virus that causes AIDS. we would have a Nobel Prize, and there is no Nobel Prize for that. So in my view, these low immunity conditions must be the result of some energetic alterations in the magnetic blood of life, mainly due to disharmonious behaviors. Some of them involve incorrect sexuality, as you all know. Not in all cases, obviously, because there is something in the blood that can be transmitted. This is also true. Some kind of astral magnetic energy that can get corrupt and contaminate other people. Later on, we'll expand this subject. But let's now emphasize that the greatest pandemics have always come after great wars. And in the last 20 years, we have had an increasing numbers of pandemics. Since the fall of the Twin Towers, notice that there have been actually many micro wars taking place around the world, even though there was a great war, the war of Afghanistan, that lasted more than 10 years. And basically we can consider this as the beginning of the Third World War, which is mostly based on chemical weapons, viral threats, and economic ways of causing instability. Precisely in the year 2003, an outbreak of the so-called SARS, Asian pneumonia, spread from China into India and other places, even Canada. And shortly after that, strange mutations of the so-called group of coronavirus have been taking place. Even the so-called avian influenza in the year 2009 was a type of coronavirus, according to the experts. Actually, here in Spain, we were offered campaigns of vaccinations. The government bought those vaccines to someone, spending a huge amount of money, and then those vaccines were given for free. Most of them had to be thrown into the rubbish because many people didn't want them. And of course, someone was making business with those vaccines. And what a coincidence, this took place right in the middle of a huge economic depression, the 2009 hell. I was working in Ireland at that time. Now, then, a bit later, there was another coronavirus appearing, which was known as MERS-CoV, which affects also the lungs and was detected in Saudi Arabia around 2012, right after the war of Afghanistan. And 2 years later, in 2014, there was an Ebola pandemic in Africa. In 2015, the so-called Zika virus emerged in Brazil, spreading throughout South America. And to make things even more suspicious, in 2015, Mr. Bill Gates appeared in TED, giving a speech saying that the next threat to humanity would be a viral pandemic. Coincidentally, Mr. Gates has just left his position in the executive office of Microsoft, the company that he founded, and he is now in charge, or is a member, important member of one of the foundations that promote the research of vaccines, one of the most lucrative businesses in short term. But let's let everyone make their choices. Obviously, many would say that that's a philanthropic enterprise, but I think there might be something more behind, and the universe will put everything and everyone in its place. We'll just have to wait for that, and things will get worse for those who try to get advantage of the suffering of humanity, of the weak. And now concerning the issue of COVID-19, as you may know, the official reports in the media tell that the spread of the disease began in some supermarket in China, because the Chinese buy and sell animals such as the pangolin, others say the bats, that in principle would carry this kind of virus. Some say this sort of commerce began when the communist government decades ago allowed the Chinese to sell these animals so they didn't die of starvation. But I think they were eating those things from before that. And many cultures around the world have been eating rubbish for hundreds of years. And obviously, all this is a source of viruses and pathogens. Even in the West, people eat scavengers such as swine, shellfish. Here in Spain, people eat snails. And all those things carry toxins, pathogens, viruses that enter the human organism and make people sick. And this is why some cultures avoid eating animals that are scavengers or that eat their own feces. They somehow know they are poisonous for the human being. Swine, in particular, is an animal that not only eats rubbish but absorbs negative energy. It cleans the planet, so it should also be considered sacred. But because of ignorance and selfishness, people eat it. The bad health of people in general is because of the consumption of animals, as well as cereals and other starches that contain a huge amount of pathogens and killers such as mold, which is very bad for the human organism. And obviously, all this is worsened when food is not properly cooked, something that people do not take into consideration usually because nowadays most people want to eat fast. In spite of all this, I don't think this is just a question of a virus that has spread from some animal into the human population. It is obviously understandable that humans get sick by eating things that they should not eat. This is obvious. But notice how this virus has spread too fast in too many areas of the world. And it is a mutation that science cannot understand. As I said before, scientists do not have a clear idea of what is a virus and how it originates. So there is something else. And in my opinion, it not only has to do with the low immunity of the people, but there are more factors involved that we have to understand. Very few wonder why a virus, which is something unnatural and in many cases completely artificial, emerges in the world. Now, what are we facing, really? Let's start with the word SARS, from the SARS virus. It immediately reminds me of the ancient word Sar, prince, which is present in various languages and is present also at the root of the word Saruman, the evil character, the black wizard in the Lord of the Rings. But it's also in the word Saros, which is the lunar cycle of 223 moons in the Sumerian Babylonian astronomy. And the Hebrew wisdom also speaks of the Sarim, the princes. Sar is prince in Hebrew. And these celestial princes rule nations and are mentioned in sacred scriptures. For instance, when we hear in Daniel 10 that the prince of Persia stood in the way of prophet Daniel. And this prince was not another man, it was another thing, another force. And this might be what in Greece was known as archontoi, archons, rulers. And as Plato said in the dialogue Critias, this split the planet into sectors to rule over the humans, which were seen as sheep, and they rule by means of persuasion. And of course, Master Ishua also came to announce that the prince of this world was coming. Now, was he referring to these old princes? And what are they? Well, to me, these heavenly princes are not just physical entities, but rather psychic energies and fallen planetary intelligences that govern areas of the earth and nations, forcing also certain events. They are intelligent, of course, and obviously the great human leaders of nations serve these forces some way or another. They develop politics that move cultures toward certain directions, giving certain results. And by putting on the crown of death, they reject the crown of loving life, the divine will. And manifesting that loving will of life is actually the finality of true humanity, which should grow in awareness of the divine purpose. However, humans in general agree to serve those who steal their will, and thus many deprive themselves of the qualities of the divine being, the unconditional love that leads to undisturbed and modified life and serene conscience, full of blissful serenity. Those four qualities are the qualities of pure being, which are expressed in a four-letter word, Yud He Vav He, which means being, literally. When we read it backwards, it means existence. It's known as Havaya. And precisely after losing contact with this pure being and existence, humanity fell under the influence of cold, residual energies that in Hebrew are known as kar, cold. Interestingly, the two letters of kar, kuf and resh, are also found in the word keter, which means crown, the will to give. And by the way, in Spanish, crown is known as corona, corona, coronavirus. And moreover, the root kor is related to the dragon. Kor in Sumerian, I think, means dragon, and it's present in other words such as Korea, cornudo, which in Spanish means with horns, horned, the horns of the dragon. And notice how the dragon is associated to the royal crowns, whose symbols usually have the dragon. And they are obviously a reference to the architects, the fallen Elohim, the rulers, the archons, as you want to call them, fallen rulers that are behind the chaos that we see on earth, as Master Ishwar revealed. And in my view, above all this has to do with the raw energy these beings left here on earth, a psychic energy that must be transformed. Otherwise, it's a rock that smashes us. Actually, when we read rock backwards, we get dragon, Kor, which is the false rock upon which we cannot build a solid house. Only upon the true rock of salvation, the diamond of our being, can we build the true mansion of the divine. And that's basically the foundation of the universal Messiah. But this foundation is completely absent in our society. Therefore, it's not just a coincidence that the new coronavirus is emerging. This simply indicates an excess of cold energy in the planet in general. There is a lot of coldness, cruelty, all because the crown of life, corona de vida, in Spanish, COVID, has been stolen. And humanity was already warned, I am coming soon, hold fast on what you have, so no one steals your crown, your will. Revelation 3:11. Now, when humanity does not express her love for true life, she cannot transform properly celestial energies that are coming, having a psychic nature that can be destructive. Heavenly influences can be destructive as well. In Hebrew wisdom, they are actually known as astral envy. And these energies, in turn, make people a slave of parasites that have a very low frequency. And this is not something to be tolerated anymore. This is the limit. Even nature is giving humanity an ultimatum. Therefore, in the same way that steam, vapor, kills pathogens and viruses, even the coronavirus, humanity must raise the frequency of the spirit to have warmth in the heart, escaping all possible selfish delusions. And it should not be forgotten that primordial wisdom has always warned that when humanity wastes vital energies and cosmic energies that should be transformed inside, certain entities and parasites take advantage of those energies. And all this implies the growth of negative emotions, excess of imagination, incorrect use of sex energy, onanism, and even the use of birth control, because the energies of life were not designed to fall outside on the earth. They need protection, a covering, otherwise they generate a series of parasites and viruses that make people sick. Actually, I recently realized that when we read COVID forwards and backwards, we get very deep meanings. For instance, COVID in Spanish can mean co-vida, which means something that is co-life, it goes with life, it is not life, but it sucks up vital energy. And when we read the word backwards, we get dibuk, which reminds me very much of dibuk, a Hebrew word that means astral adherence, something that attaches to the energy bodies. There are several kinds of astral adherences. So I'm going to give you the main examples. We have the obsessors, which are disembodied human personalities that stick themselves to people's energy bodies and induce compulsive behaviors, obsessions, such as addiction to sex, drug, tobacco, alcohol, etc. And they feed on energy leakages, low energy leakages. And all that can make people very sick, generating psychic viruses that can also generate physical viruses, of course, including the immunodeficiency conditions such as AIDS. There are also astral vampires, which are of several kinds, and one of them is a human disembodied personality that during physical existence developed very strong mental powers of the astral body by practicing black magic, and after the death of the physical body still uses those powers in order to exert a very powerful influence on humans. They induce violent behaviors, they can even cause wars. Some historical characters are said to have become astral vampires. The most famous case was probably Vlad Tepes, the impaler of Transylvania, who inspired the legend of Dracula, as you may know. And many false saints fall also under the category of astral vampire. Actually, most of them inspire religions or feed the worship in religions, the worship of blood-covered Christs, virgins, fatty Buddhas, all sorts of strange alien gods. And these vampires offer favors in exchange for worship because they suck up energy from people who are praying, and they can reproduce any images they like. They can shapeshift. And this is why many people believe that they have been helped by God Himself, that they have received the visit of Jesus Christ or any other kind of idol. And many manifestations of negative energy actually come from collective prayers, which generate the so-called egregores, psychic entities that can take over people, even masses of people, controlling the hearts and the minds, cancelling the will and conscience, because there is no understanding. And despite all this involves human activities or energy residues left by humanity, many astral vampires were not human. They were actually ancient species. We can call them aliens or even demons. Daimon is accuser. Actually, many of them tempt humanity and then accuse humanity of behaving like animals. Even diseases are somehow accusing humanity. There is something humanity is not doing. Humanity is not doing the homework. Now, in addition to that, there are astral larvae or astral worms that also steal energy, using a sort of energy tentacles. I have seen those beings and other types of vampires. And high in the atmosphere, There are also worm-like creatures or luminous snakes that have been actually filmed, and who knows, but they might also be some sort of parasite. Check that out. Search for sky worms in YouTube. Very popular, of course, are also the flying rods, the energetic insects that cross at very high speeds, and they show up in videos and photos. Some say they are just insects, but they are other kind of insects. And of course, we have the famous luminous orbs, which are fragments of light bodies that in some cases can also suck up energy from people instead of helping. And many actually come from soul loss, a phenomenon that requires soul retrieval, something practiced by shamans and mystics since very ancient days. Now, the only way to protect ourselves from all these astral parasites is by raising up our vibrations of life, strengthening the energy body, and developing the mind and emotions of the astral body, which becomes the vessel to carry the true loving life, our true being. We are not those bodies. We are emanations that come to incarnate in those bodies, which play the role of Merkaba, vehicle. And don't forget, all this implies taking measures to avoid feeding negative parasites. We must avoid accumulating garbage because it radiates biophotonic light. We must avoid accumulating dust, papers, old junk, because all these leave astral traces and others that attract astral parasites. We should not accept religious or tribal objects, even if they come from some relative. My sister brought me some sort of mask from Africa, and it was very ugly. I didn't resonate with it, and I recently threw it into a wood destroying machine because I didn't want it for anything. And it's also important to avoid contracts with fallen beings, guides that demand worship, prayers, etc. And many contracts are established by means of negative emotions, incorrect sexuality, and also tattoos or some sort of habit. This is why some people with fallen souls have tattoos with reptilians and aliens. Some even sharpen their teeth and cut their tongue to resemble those beings. And overall, the negative energy from the social masses is actually the greatest food source for invisible parasites. Humanity is not the top of the food chain. Scientists are very naive believing that. This actually explains why major epidemics occur after wars and major conflicts. Actually, in the 1920s, a sage named Gurdjieff, which I have already mentioned in other occasions, said that the flu, the influenza, was caused by the accumulation of undigested astral energies that are stored in the atmosphere. All because people does not work inwardly to absorb those necessary substances from the atmosphere to form the so-called second body or light body, astral body, which is made of planetary and solar energies. And they mostly enter through the breath, but they can only be transformed, cooked, by means of conscious work, conscious breathing, development of attention, consciousness, and so on. And this makes a lot of sense because if these energies are not used, they are just simply floating around and they become food for a whole gang of parasites. Apart from this, there are obviously biological pathogens and other physical conditions that affect us. The reduction of the protective field is also due to transgenic foods, pollution, contaminated water, toxic additives, mobile networks, internet signals, the 4G, 5G now, whose potency is going to fry literally all those who have not a good protective electromagnetic field and auric field. And for sure, viruses can mutate due to various influences, including human misuse of electromagnetism, as well as quantum energies. But obviously, loving life can purify everything. Even the Earth is now recovering with this temporal break. We'll see how people behave after this. We should not forget either that a good hygiene is obviously necessary. I always have washed my hands after touching money or unclean surfaces, and always before eating as well. Not only now, but since I was a child, but this is something many people never do. Months ago, I even watched a mother picking up from the floor a biscuit that her baby had thrown up, and she ate it. So, and the problem is that viruses and many kinds of unnatural bacteria are a threat to everyone, even those who are working for the tree of life. Viruses are put here to destroy us. For example, some weeks ago, I found a little box with lip cocoa that had been at home for almost 20 years. It had belonged to my sister, and I put a little on my parched lips. And coincidentally, hours later, I began to feel flu-like symptoms. I felt very bad. Surely that thing had some sort of virus, because who knows where that was. And I just rested in bed with warm, eating very little, with conscious determination to heal, because I had to do things, and the symptoms receded in a couple of days. It was when I recorded a video of my encounter with the amphibious humanoid. And this is because the immune system is not just biological, but also bioenergetic and spiritual. But we have lost a huge amount of power in that regard. We still have to recover our full potential, and then not even the worst virus will be able to harm us. But obviously all this is something that can only be understood by a minority. Humans in general were zombified a long time ago and have fallen prey to all kinds of parasites, which are even worshipped through religion, politics, sports, cinema, all sorts of pastimes. And it's time to ponder what's the point of spending so much energy on those pastimes. Where is now the so-called Lord God worship in churches, temples, and all sorts of holy places that nowadays are closed because of a little bug called COVID-19? Obviously, the God Ammon, the ego ram, is being slaughtered in mass. And this is actually the true Passover. Very few have realized that. Only those who manifest the qualities of the divine being will be able to raise the frequency of vitality, perceiving even a higher earth, to which we will return eventually after living with our mission in this madhouse, which is populated by tares and wheat, and both are going to be separated. And let us not forget that even if physical death occurs, nothing can touch us on an essential level, because we are under the cover of the immortal being and its intelligent energies. And so far, thank you very much for listening with attention. I will leave this written on the blog. And meanwhile, blessings of unconditional love and modified life, the universal conscience that makes us feel integrated in a pure cosmos, and blissful serenity.